Hey everyone, on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast, I've got a new guest host, Lia Fey, on today to talk about security awareness services. And we hear about security awareness training a lot in the industry today, right? But in today's episode, we're really going to dive into what it is. What do organizations need to do to be successful with security awareness services? Where does it help? What are some caveats, some tips and tricks? We're going to be talking about all this and more on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insights straight from the security lab here at Hornetsecurity. As always, I'm your host, Andy Serwich, and with me today, I've got Lia Fey. How's it going, Lia?
Fine, and you?
Doing good. Hey, I'm really happy that we got you on the camera today. You know, we got a lot of great content to talk about, but before we get into that, for our listeners and viewers, if you're watching this on YouTube or another video platform, can you go ahead and tell our folks a little bit more about yourself?
I am Lia. I work since now I think nearly 3 years at Hornetsecurity because before it was IT Seal, but we had a match.
Right.
If somebody could say it's like this. I was before a data protection officer, but you know it's a really, really dry working field. So I switched to security awareness, and now I am a team lead in the customer success team for our security awareness service, and I help the customers to get security awareness in their company.
You know, sounds like you're a perfect fit for our topic today. And the thing that we're going to be talking about today is, you know, real world guidance on security awareness services, right? So it sounds like this is right in your wheelhouse for skill set. And I guess before we dive too deep on this topic, the first thing that I want to do is kind of set a baseline for our listeners, right? And that is answer the question of what is a security awareness service? Can you kind of give us a little bit of a definition there?
Security awareness service is such a big field.
Right.
It is awareness in phishing simulation. It is awareness with e-trainings, awareness with how do I speak to my employees to get them aware. Security awareness service is not just one thing. It's a whole bunch of things you can do, and you need a guide. And our security awareness service is not just a tool; it's a guide who is guiding you through this theme.
Right. That makes sense. And I mean, I would say over the last 5 years, again, you know, our listeners know that my background is in system engineering, infrastructure administration. So I always look at stuff kind of from that perspective, right? And you know, when I look at security awareness services, or, you know, generally security awareness training, as part of the industry calls it, you know, I always see questions floating around out there like, why is this type of training so effective in today's market, right? And I mean, I see it being effective for a couple of reasons. Again, starting with more kind of the technical side of things, I think about the way that we used to do security, right? It used to be we only had to worry about the four walls of our business. We'd slap a firewall down on the entry points, and we'd put antivirus on all the endpoints, and we'd call it good, right? And I'm sure that's not the first time on this show I've said exactly that about how we used to do security, but it's true, right? That's how we used to do security. And to me, the old way of doing security just doesn't work anymore, right? Because you had these definitions and hash-based scanning mechanisms, and they just don't work anymore, right? Because they can't detect strange things, you know, abnormal behavior, and ultimately, especially if your organization is spearphished, something is going to end up in a user's mailbox at some point, right? And that's the key point where maybe something happens. A security incident might happen at that point, or maybe it doesn't, depending on whether the end user clicks on something, right? So I think that's where, at least in my mind, that's where security awareness services like ours comes into play. But I wanted to kind of get your take on this as well too, Leah.
First, we need to understand why it's such a big problem to train security awareness. And a friend of mine said before some weeks, it's pretty easy to understand why it's so difficult. Things which are dangerous or which kills you, you learned in your childhood. Don't go across the street without looking right or left.
It's true.
Don't go across the street with a red traffic light. If there's a stranger, run and scream. These are things we learn in our childhood for a safe life. And what you didn't learn and I didn't learn, because the whole thing is now growing up, the security awareness is something we needed to learn in our childhood for live with it. And now our children can learn it in the childhood, but we didn't. And now we need to learn it as we are grown up. And this is the baseline why we need to train. And why is our security awareness service so effective is because we create a safe space for the employees to learn. They get phishing mails. They with a teachable moment. If you click, there is a teachable moment, and it don't says haha. It says, hey, you've got luck. No problem. Here we can explain it to you how you can handle this next time.
Right.
And we try to train in anonymous groups. So the CISO or anybody else can put his employees in groups like HR or finance. And if the group need more help, they can take the whole group in a room and say, okay, now you can ask me questions. I answer them. I saw the whole finance team often gives credentials in login scenarios. Maybe we can speak about this. And the employee is not afraid that he can click and now there is anger. He knows there is a safe space to learn.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's so important. I've heard stories in the industry of, system admins and CISOs struggling to get their end users to participate, right? And I think this is probably why, because you see a lot of end users probably look at end user security awareness services and they're like, oh, if I mess up, I'm going to get in trouble, right? Or there's going to be, instead of just getting in trouble, it almost feels like punishment, because I know there are some players in this space in the industry that, oh, hey, you failed this phishing simulation test. Go take this hour-long training course, right? And now, on top of everything else the user has going on, now they have to figure out, okay, where are they going to fit in this training course, right? So like you said, I think it's so important that they have a safe space where, they can learn without fear of punishment, right? And I think a large subset of the industry doesn't think about that, and that's one of the things I really like about our product in this space. I think it solves an important issue, right? So, we've spent some time talking about, why it's important, what security awareness services are, and I think one area I'd like to get into a little bit is, why is it so effective against the current slate of attacks that we're seeing in the industry? So, looking at things like an increase in phishing, if I remember correctly, and I'll be sure to link this in the show notes so everybody can double check me. But in our cybersecurity report that we came out with earlier this year, if I remember correctly, 40% or 39 and a half, one of the two, um, almost 40% of malicious emails that were sent were phishing attempts. Almost 40%. So when you compare that with all the other attack types, I mean, obviously phishing is working for threat actors out there, right? Because it's psychological, it targets the end user, and it's fairly easy to get those types of attacks through, spam and malware filters, right? So I mean, Leah, you could probably talk a little bit to the psychological aspect of security awareness services, in terms of being able to spot phishing attempts, right?
Um, I read something about the psychological increase of an real phishing attack. It is when in an company there is a phishing attack, the employees which are included in this um, sometimes get PTBS, you know,
Right.
the
PTSD.
soldier
Yeah.
PTSD. Yes,
Yeah.
right.
Yep.
It's a really really big impact. It's not just that the data is away or encrypted. It's also the psychological factor. So we need to strengthen the people. They need the trust that they can handle it, or that they know when there is something wrong, I know where I can go. And if you have the trust in yourself, then you can handle something like this more effective. Sorry. Um, and this is why you need to learn. And in our system, we train the people in an easy level, and if they uh, finalized it, then they grew in the next level, and the next, and the next. Every body is catched on the own space of knowledge and taken by. It's a long way, and it's more about security culture, awareness culture, company culture. Everything
Right.
has a really really big impact on this.
That's a good point, and you mentioned the easy, right? So our ESI score. So I think that's one important piece in our solution. Again, looking at this from a system admin's perspective. So the ESI, correct me if I'm wrong, Leah, stands for Employee Security Index. And basically
Correct.
it's a score that gets assigned to each user, anonymously if the organization wants to, or if you want to see. And I was making this joke on a webinar just the other day. If you want to know that Bob in accounting has a really low score, you can see if Bob has a low score as the administrator if you make that policy decision as an organization, right? And I think what's so important about the ESI is the fact that it ties in with the automation and AI that we've got inside of our tool set to make sure we're only sending as much training as the user needs, correct? Can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
um yeah, I at the end of the year I had a customer and one of his employees was calculating if everybody gets 3 phishing mails and needs 3 minutes for work with it, how much it will cost the company. But this is the wrong calculation, because the return of security invest is a calculation which calculates what would it cost if it happens.
Right. Right.
And This is what we need to understand. And we try, no, not we try, we can make the costs really, really not slow, small, because we have booster. People with less training, with more knowledge, they don't need so much training, and our system um, can see this. And in the productivity booster, people, they don't click, they get a present, a small present, maybe just one mail per month instead of 3. And the single user booster is the same but switched. If there is a user who needs more training, the system send e-trainings with typical videos for if he makes some credentials, it is a video about credentials, or if he opens much files or macros, then it's more with this theme. So our system can have a view on the employee without de-anonymize.
Right.
So you have the much you need and not overwhelmed.
That's a good point. Because yeah, I think about the time aspect of security awareness services, right? And again, looking at this from the perspective of a sysadmin, not only is it a large time constraint for the users, but also for the administrator. So one common complaint I've heard amongst administrators is like, hey, I've got these security awareness services, but they take a lot of my time to run, right? They're usually talking about one of our competitors. What I love about our service is the fact that it doesn't take a lot of time for the administrator to run, because we got automation and AI built into the product that centers around this ESI score. Can you speak a little bit to how the automation works in relation to the user's ESI score? So like you said, you mentioned the boosters, right? The boosters play into that automated process of the end user getting just the training that they need based on their score, correct?
Correct. If you like to use it, you can also say, okay, no, I like to have the training on highest level with 3 or 4 mails per month, and I will train in a line without breaks, um, without getting less emails for good users or something else. This is your choice. You can use the automatic system, or you can switch. If you like to have another features, you can switch it on or off. So to get started, it's really easy. You get the synchronization with your HD, and not HAD.
AD, yep, got it.
And then we have the user data, and then you can say, okay, start next week, and it runs. If you use filters which are not from us, or sandboxes or firewalls or something like this, you need to whitelist them.
Right.
But if you're a Hornet customer, everything runs through. You don't need to do anything. This is
Gotcha.
We made it like this because we have the whole service in our house, and we can make it that you don't have to act really much with the in the first steps for starting.
Gotcha. Yeah, I really like that, because what kind of sent me down that rabbit hole, right, is when you were mentioning the purse nets at this company that was like, okay, well, if, each user gets 3 emails and they spend this much time on each email across the company, it's going to cost us this much time in lost productivity. you can't look at it that way, right? Because one, from the security aspect, if an incident occurs, I can guarantee you it's going to be way more over and above what your loss in productivity is going to be. But really, I mean, when we think about the solution from the end user's perspective, there's not a lot of time needed. And from the administrator's perspective, like, you just flip this thing on and let it go, basically, right? So to me, that's a win-win. And that's why I always like to bring this up, because a lot of my colleagues in the industry, like I said, have complained about the amount of time it takes to run services like this. And ours isn't like that, which I love about the solution. So, all right. Well, I think one other thing I wanted to touch base on with the time we have left is talking about the right kind of training. So, an end user gets an email and, we create that teachable moment, right? Like, oh, darn, they clicked on the link or they entered their credentials in one of the phishing simulations. They open a file, whatever. I mentioned earlier, there are those solutions out there that, okay, go take an hour-long training. We don't do that. Can you kind of speak as to what the right style of training is and why it's effective?
Our e-trainings are short but pregnant. I don't know if it's a similar word in English. Maybe it's the English word now. They are on point.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. And now I understand what I said. Okay.
Hey,
Sorry.
it's fine. It's fine. That's why we love these podcasts, because we can all have a little fun and laugh a little bit at the same time, right?
And my microphone likes to cuddle today. I don't understand.
I was gonna say,
Uh,
mine does that from time to time too, and it's always fun fighting with the microphone during the session. But you're coming through loud and clear, definitely. So
right. So I forgot the question.
no, I was just gonna say, when it comes down to it, when we talk about the types of training we've got, what is the right amount of training, I guess, right? Time versus effectiveness, kind of how do we handle that for our solution, right? Again, talking about security awareness in general on this episode, using our solution as an example.
We try. Our system has learn paths behind it for our
Yep.
e-trainings. So if you start, the employees get the first e-training. It's IT and I. It's the first step to understand why does it affect me, because it's really really important for the employees to understand why they need to train this.
Right.
And this is the first step. After this, the phishing mails starten, and on every user, there's a counter. You don't see it, but it is in our database. And if you click, the counter goes to negative, and if they don't click, the counter goes positive. And if the counter reach out the next level, you grew up in level 2 or 3 or 5, and every few months, depends on what you choose. You can have 4 e-trainings per year, 8 or 12. 12 is really much. 12 is every month.
That's a lot,
And
yeah.
some customers ask, why do you have just 30 e-trainings? Others have 150. And I say, no problem. If you don't like that your employees are working, you can give them 150. It's no problem, but then bye-bye. We try
Right.
to put the right knowledge into short videos with fun. So you can't just watch the video, you need to practice in the video. There are some question tasks, and you need to do them for finalize. Some English words are really, really tricky.
I know they are. It's a weird language. I apologize on our behalf.
Yeah. So we try to train for every user on what they need.
Gotcha. So, with the few minutes we have left, I always like to frame these discussions with real world scenarios, right? I can think of a real world scenario where security awareness services uh, would have helped fend off an attack if there had been any around during that time. I have a few gray hairs in my beard. I've been in the industry for a while, so I remember a time when I was working for an MSP, a service provider, before the days of security awareness services, and our CFO got an email that appeared to be from the CEO, very cleverly crafted, right? It was spear phishing, had the CEO's name in it, title, all the contact information was correct. Very, very, yeah, very cleverly crafted. And in this email, there's always a sense of urgency, right? In these types of attacks. Hey, we have this really urgent invoice that needs to be paid. I need you to wire $70,000 to this account over here. Thankfully, like I said, this is before the days of security awareness services, but thankfully we had been doing enough training just internally, having the occasional meeting, being like, hey, be sure you guys are looking out for this stuff. Our CFO stopped long enough and looked at it and said, you know what? This looks a little odd. Gets up out of his chair, walks across the aisle. Hey, what's the deal with this invoice? What invoice? And well, it cracked the whole thing open at that point, right? But that's the thing I always think of when it comes to stopping these types of attacks. I'm sure you have way more stories than I do on this one. I don't know if you've got any good ones that you wanna talk about.
I love one story. um, they the senior vice president of Inside Sales gave his credentials,
Ooh.
and as they try to analyze it, they ask him, "What happened? How do they get your credentials?" And what he said was, "I don't know why they have my credentials because it's the forename of my unborn grandchild. I don't know how they can reach out this name because it's unborn." You know?
Right.
So sometimes some people you can't train.
That's very true. And of course, I'm sure if you went out to this person's social media, I'm sure there was no mention of their unborn grandchild's name anywhere. I'm being sarcastic, of course, but typically that's where, I mean, if I was an attacker and I was looking for this information, I'd be doing OSINT, right? I'd be looking and digging, and I'm sure that's where it came up.
But for this, you don't need to do OSINT. You just need to do a rainbow table or something like this.
Right. Right.
There are lists inside the darknet you can use.
That's very true. It's crazy how easy it is for threat actors sometimes, and how do you communicate that with people, right? People don't realize how easy it is for threat actors, and I think if people truly understood, you wouldn't see the pushback that you see on training programs like this sometimes, from internal users, right?
Some of our users and customers say this training is great. Our e-training is such nice to understand. They take it at home and watched it with their family.
Oh,
It is
really?
great. It's a multiplicator.
That's really cool, actually. I'd never heard about that before. That's really cool. So kind of spreading the security training knowledge. That's really cool. And I guess that brings up one other question that we probably have time to cover here really quick, and that is, from your perspective, working with people that have been using the solution, I know it's really geared towards spotting, phishing and email type threats. At least what I've seen in my experience is that people who go through this type of training, not only do they get better at spotting email-based threats, but they just become more aware of security stuff in general. So now you start seeing end users say things like, oh, hey, this text message looks weird, and that Teams chat looks a little off, or this phone call I just got seemed like it could have been social engineering, right? I'm sure you run into that quite a bit, I imagine.
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
Then the new method is smishing. in the last weeks, I get 3 SMS, short messages on my mobile device, that my package needs to, in German, it's Zoll. If you carry something about country borders, you need to pay.
Right. It's a toll of some kind. Yeah, the word's different based on the country. What do we call that in the States? I'm supposed to know this, but I can't think of it right now. But I know what you're talking about.
Okay, then it's the problem that I don't know it. Great. So we have smishing, we have wishing. It's a phone call for getting information. We got social engineering. The people have so much information in the internet, and it's a footprint you can't delete.
Yep.
Once in the internet, it is in the internet. Or I read about an attack. This was really, really scaring. They take a drone and with some equipment and fly it on the roof of a house, and they put a network like the film,
Interesting.
the company network on it, so the employees logged into the wrong network, and this was the attack.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to read up on that one. That's a fairly high level of sophistication there. I mean, it's not new that, you know, setting up a rogue access point, right? That's not new, but landing one on the company's roof with a drone, that takes it to a whole nother level. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well,
You don't need to go inside.
Right. That's crazy. Well, Lia, we're about out of time for this particular episode. I think we're going to have you back for a part 2, I think, where we just talk about real world scenarios and stories like this, because I think our listeners really enjoy this type of stuff. So we'll be sure to have you back. I want to say thank you for taking the time to come talk to us today. It's been great having you. So really appreciate it.
Appreciate it too. It is every time great to speak with you and with all you outside.
Definitely. It's fun having you. So, and those of you watching, really appreciate tuning into the show today. If you found value in today's episode, be sure to, as they say, smash that like and subscribe button, right? You can find us out on the social medias as well, under Hornetsecurity. Again, I'll put the contact details for Lia and myself in the show notes below this video as well. All the resources we talked about today, I'll get those in the show notes as well. And in the meantime, if you're interested in any of our services, including the security awareness service that we spent, quite a bit of time talking about today, you can go out to hornetsecurity.com for more information. With that, we'll let you get back to your day. Have a good one. Stay safe out there.